Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at exploring the power of faith
Okay.
in our modern world. And we've got a few different sources to help us unpack this whole thing.
Oh,
We've got a passage from Hebrews,
okay.
a really personal story about faith, and even some song lyrics.
Wow.
Yeah. So it seems like these days, everywhere you turn, there's this demand for evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to have proof.
Right.
But what happens when you run into something that goes like way beyond what we can see or touch?
Right.
That's what we're going to be diving into today.
It's a tension a lot of us feel, This wanting evidence, but also yearning for something more.
Yeah, absolutely. And,
Something beyond just the purely rational.
yeah. And speaking of wanting evidence,
Mhm.
the book of Hebrews kind of jumps right in with a definition that almost turns things upside down.
Okay.
Hebrews 11.1 calls faith the substance of things hoped for,
Right.
the evidence of things not seen.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you make of that? I mean, it seems almost like a paradox.
Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, the verse is saying that faith itself is a form of evidence.
Okay.
But it's not about tangible proof.
Right.
It's about a really deep inner conviction,
Mm-hmm.
a trust in something that is just beyond our ability to perceive it.
So instead of relying on what we can see and touch, faith is about trusting in what we can't.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that even work in a world that's constantly telling us to follow the science and trust the data?
Yeah. That's where I think those examples in Hebrews 11 become so powerful.
Yeah.
The writer just goes on to list all these incredible people from the Bible.
Yeah.
Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, all these
Yeah.
people that acted on faith, even when they didn't have any physical proof.
Yeah, those stories are pretty mind-blowing.
Right.
Like Noah building this giant ark when nobody had ever even seen rain before.
Right.
You got to admit, that takes a lot of trust.
A lot of trust. And that's what the writer is trying to show us,
Mhm.
what faith in action actually looks like. It's not about blind belief.
Right.
It's about stepping out in trust, even when it seems completely illogical
Yeah.
or even impossible.
I'm starting to see how this connects with that personal story.
Yeah.
We have more about faith.
Yes.
The writer talks about going through this really tough pregnancy,
Mm-hmm.
just facing all this uncertainty and fear.
Mm.
But then she talks about this moment where she chooses to surrender her baby to God's care.
Right.
And in that surrender, she finds peace.
That's a beautiful example of how faith works in the real world. She didn't have any guarantees, no scientific evidence that everything would be okay,
Mm-hmm.
but she acted on faith. And in that act of trust, she experienced something beyond herself.
It makes you wonder if that peace,
Right.
that inner knowing,
Yeah.
was its own form of evidence for her.
Total.
Like a confirmation that she was on the right path.
Exactly. And both the biblical figures and this woman, they show us that faith isn't about ignoring logic or reason.
Mm-hmm.
It's about integrating them with this deeper trust in something beyond ourselves.
But let's be honest, it's not always easy to live that way, right? I mean, we live in a world that is so focused on what we can see and prove.
For sure.
How do we even begin to cultivate that kind of deep trust when everything around us is just screaming for evidence?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
And I think it's something a lot of people wrestle with, especially in our modern world.
Yeah.
Maybe we can start by looking at what our sources tell us about how faith actually works.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
What insights can we get from these different perspectives? We got the Bible, the personal story, those song lyrics.
Yeah.
They all seem to be pointing towards something pretty profound.
They do, don't they? One thing that jumps out at me is that faith isn't passive.
Okay.
It's not something that just happens to us.
Right.
It's something that we actively participate in.
So it's not just about believing. It's about doing something with that belief.
Precisely.
Okay.
Think about those examples from Hebrews. Noah built the ark. Abraham left his home.
Yeah.
Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. These weren't just people who sat around thinking about faith.
Right.
They acted on it.
I see what you mean. It's like
Yeah.
their faith propelled them into action, even when it didn't make sense
Yeah.
from a logical standpoint.
Exactly. And I think that's a key takeaway for us, too.
Yeah.
Faith isn't just a mental exercise. It's a way of life.
Right.
It's about taking those steps of trust, even when we're not sure where they'll lead.
So are you saying that by acting in faith, we actually create space for something bigger than ourselves to work in our lives?
I think there's definitely something to that.
Oh.
It's like we're building a bridge between our human efforts and this realm of the divine.
Right.
We take that first step and then something extraordinary can happen.
I love that analogy of a bridge.
Yeah.
It's like we're extending ourselves towards God.
Yeah.
and he's extending himself towards us, and faith is that meeting point in the middle.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of something from the song lyrics.
Oh, yeah.
It says, "It takes faith to step out on nothing and believe that something is there."
Okay. Now, that's an image that really resonates.
Right.
It's like we're choosing to believe that there's something solid beneath our feet, even though we can't see it yet.
Exactly. And that choice, that willingness to trust, is often what allows God to reveal himself to us in ways we never expected.
But how do we cultivate that kind of faith when it feels like everything around us is telling us to rely on what we can see and prove?
Yeah.
It's like we're bombarded with messages saying, don't be naive, demand evidence, don't just blindly believe.
It's a real tension, isn't it? And I think it's something that a lot of people, especially those who are trying to live out their faith, struggle with deeply. Especially those who are trying to live out their faith struggle with deeply. Maybe one way to think about this is to think about faith as a journey rather than a destination.
I like that.
You know?
So it's not about having all the answers or figuring everything out at once.
Right.
It's about being open to the process.
Yeah.
To the possibility that God might be working in ways we don't understand.
Exactly. And just like any journey, there are going to be ups and downs,
Right.
Moments of clarity, moments of doubt. I think the key is to keep moving forward, even when it's tough.
So what does moving forward look like, practically speaking? Our sources seem to offer some pretty specific advice on how to actually cultivate faith.
They do, don't they? One of the things that stands out to me is this emphasis on remembering. Both Hebrews 11 and the song lyrics talk about the importance of looking back at the stories of those who've gone before us.
You mean like the examples we were discussing earlier?
Yeah.
Noah, Abraham.
Yeah.
All those people that dared to believe and act on their faith, even when it seemed impossible.
Exactly. Their stories are like a roadmap for us. They show us that faith is possible, even in the most difficult situations, and they remind us that God has been faithful in the past, so we can trust him in the present.
Yeah. It's like having this giant cloud of witnesses cheering us on, saying, you can do this. We've been there, and we know God will come through for you too.
I love that image. And it's not just about blindly imitating them,
Right.
It's about studying their lives, their choices, their relationship with God, and gleaning wisdom from their journeys.
So it's about recognizing those patterns of faith that have played out throughout history and applying those principles to our own lives.
Precisely. And it's about finding encouragement in their stories. Especially when we're facing our own challenges and doubts.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about those times when we feel like our faith is failing us? What about those moments where we pray and pray, but it seems like God is silent? What do we do then?
That's such an important question, and I think it's one that a lot of people grapple with at some point in their lives. The reality is that faith isn't always easy. There will be times when we feel weak, discouraged, and even tempted to give up.
So it's normal to experience those ups and downs.
Absolutely.
Those seasons of doubt and uncertainty.
Faith isn't about feeling strong and confident all the time. It's about choosing to trust God even when we feel weak and vulnerable.
But how do we do that when we feel like our prayers are hitting a brick wall? How do we keep believing when it seems like nothing is changing?
That's where our sources offer some really powerful reminders. First, remember that God is always with us, even when we don't feel his presence. He sees our struggle, he hears our cries, and he is working behind the scenes, even when we can't see it.
So just because we don't see immediate answers or feel God's presence tangibly doesn't mean he's not there or that he's not working on our behalf.
That's right. Our feelings don't dictate God's faithfulness. He is constant and unchanging even when our emotions fluctuate.
That's encouraging. But what else can we do? When we're struggling to believe, is there anything practical we can do to kind of jumpstart our faith?
Well, remember the song lyrics we discussed earlier? Prayer is the key to the kingdom, and faith unlocks the door. Even when we're filled with doubt, we can still choose to pray. We can pour out our hearts to God, express our fears and frustrations, and ask him to help us in our unbelief.
It's like instead of giving up on prayer when we're struggling, we should actually lean into it even more.
Exactly.
Use it as a lifeline to connect with God and ask for his help.
Exactly. Prayer is not just about getting what we want. It's about communicating with God, strengthening our relationship with him, and allowing his peace and strength to fill us. And remember that faith unlocks the door.
Are you saying that even when we don't feel like we have faith, the act of praying can actually stir up our faith?
That's what I'm saying, and make us more receptive to what God wants to do in our lives.
Right.
Prayer is an act of faith in itself. By choosing to pray, even when we're filled with doubt, we're taking a step towards God, and He honors that step.
Okay.
He meets us where we are and helps us to grow in our belief.
This has given me a lot to think about.
We're good.
It's like instead of trying to force ourselves to have more faith, we can simply come to God as we are,
right,
doubts and all, and ask Him to meet us in those places of uncertainty.
That's such a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And it ties back to that idea of faith being a journey,
Right.
There will be times when we feel strong and confident, and there will be times when we feel weak and unsure, but through it all, God is there walking with us,
right,
guiding us and helping us to grow.
This conversation is really helping me to see faith in a new light, It's not about having all the answers or pretending that we never have doubts.
Right.
It's about being honest with ourselves, with God, and being open to the process, even when it's messy.
I couldn't have said it better myself, and that reminds me of something else that the song lyrics mention.
Okay, what's that?
The lyrics talk about how faith unlocks the door.
Right.
It's as if faith gives us access to a whole new realm of possibilities.
Okay.
A dimension where God's power can flow freely into our lives.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
So are you saying that faith isn't just about believing in God?
Right.
It's also about experiencing His presence, His power in a tangible way.
I think that's a big part of it, and it goes back to that idea of faith being a verb.
Okay.
Something we actively participate in when we step out in faith, when we choose to trust.
Yeah.
Even when we don't fully understand, we open ourselves up to a whole new level of experience.
It's like faith becomes a conduit for God's power to work in our lives.
Yeah.
But if that's true, then what about those times when we feel like we're praying for something specific?
Right.
But it doesn't seem like God is answering. Does that mean our faith isn't strong enough?
That's a question a lot of people wrestle with, and I think it's important to remember that God doesn't always answer our prayers in the way we expect or on our timeline.
So even when it seems like God is silent, He's still working behind the scenes.
Absolutely. And I think it's in those times when we don't see immediate results that our faith is truly tested and refined.
You mean it's in those moments of uncertainty when we have to choose to trust, even when we don't understand, that our faith actually grows deeper?
Exactly. It's like those times of waiting and wondering actually strengthen our faith muscles, preparing us for even greater things.
This has been so incredibly insightful. It's like we've been on this journey together, exploring the different facets of faith and how it can transform our lives.
For sure.
But I'm aware that we're getting close to the end of our deep dive.
Yes, unfortunately, our time is almost up.
Yeah, it is a shame our time is almost up, but I feel like we've covered so much ground already.
It is amazing, isn't it?
It really is.
Especially how our sources kind of all point to this idea that faith is more than an abstract concept. It's something you actually experience that really shapes your life.
Right. It's not about just believing certain things. It's about living them out, even when it's hard.
Exactly. And that makes me think about something we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
That idea that faith gives us access to this unseen realm,
Okay.
This spiritual reality that's beyond what we normally see.
Yeah, Hebrews talks about faith being the evidence of things not seen.
Right.
It's like acknowledging that there's more to life than what we can see and touch.
And it's not just Hebrews.
Yeah.
Remember that story we read where the writer talks about how her faith brought her peace and comfort during a really, really hard time? That was like a real experience of something she couldn't see but totally believed in.
It's like faith creates this bridge between the seen and the unseen, allowing us to tap into this source of strength and guidance and hope that goes way beyond what we can understand.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And that's where those song lyrics fit in so well,
Okay.
They remind us that prayer is the key to the kingdom and faith unlocks the door.
It's like we're given this amazing gift.
It is.
This ability to connect with something so much bigger than ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But we got to take that first step.
Right.
Choose to believe.
Yeah.
And trust that something incredible is waiting for us.
And we don't have to do it alone either.
That's right.
Think about it. The writer of Hebrews was talking about this long line of faithful people.
Yeah.
And that personal story we read talked about surrendering to God's care.
You're right. It's like we're being reminded that we're a part of this huge community of faith, past and present, and a God who loves us and wants to be with us on this journey.
Yeah, that feeling of belonging,
Yeah.
that connection to something bigger is a powerful part of faith. I think it can really help us when times get tough.
Absolutely. Knowing that we're not alone, that there's a God who cares for us and wants to be a part of our lives can make all the difference.
I couldn't agree more. But as much as I'd love to keep going.
I know, me too.
We're just about out of time.
I know. I can't believe how fast it's gone by. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you said earlier.
Yeah.
About faith being a journey.
Okay.
That really stuck with me.
Oh, good.
It's so easy to think that faith is about knowing everything you know or never having any doubts.
Right.
But you're right. It's a process, a journey with twists and turns.
For sure.
And, unexpected detours.
And it's in those detours that we often grow the most.
Right.
Think about those stories in Hebrews. Noah was ridiculed.
Right.
Abraham had to leave his home. Moses doubted himself.
Yeah.
They all faced challenges, but their faith grew stronger because of them.
So it's not about avoiding the hard stuff. It's about going through it.
Yeah.
Trusting that God's with us the whole time.
Exactly. That's the best part, isn't it?
It is.
Faith isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up and seeking and trusting.
Right.
Even when you don't get it.
I love that it's so hopeful,
It is.
and empowering. And I think it's the perfect way to end our deep dive.
I agree. We've covered so much today.
We have.
The foundation of faith, those personal stories, and those great lyrics that really capture what it means to believe.
And at the end of the day, I think this has been about way more than just defining faith.
Right.
It's been about realizing how powerful believing can be.
Yeah.
The courage it takes to trust in what you can't see and how it can change our lives when we open ourselves to something bigger.
Beautifully said. And if there's just one thing I hope our listeners take away, it's that faith is a journey worth taking.
Absolutely.
It will challenge you and stretch you, but in the end, it will lead you to a much deeper and more meaningful life.
Could have said it better myself. So to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into faith. We hope this has sparked something in you.
Yes.
A desire to think about what you believe and to discover what's possible when you choose to believe.